Hi, Henry.
Good morning. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, let's start by you telling us a little bit about where you work.
Well, I've for almost 50 years have worked at historic St. Mary's City, the place where Maryland began and the 17th century capital of the colony. So, I've always been fascinated by having a completely lost city to rediscover. So we've been doing that, and of course, there's a lot more to find, but it's an ongoing process for sure.
Now, that's a really neat way of looking at it, Henry. A lost city under the farm fields of St. Mary's County, for sure.
Yeah.
So, in 50 years, what is your favorite thing that you do there?
Well, we worked on many different sites, but I think the real thing I love is taking hundreds or thousands of clues, of artifacts, of features, and trying to weave them together to better understand a story that has been long forgotten about people we might know about, but also lots of people who are lost to memory at this point. So it's that synthesis and the act of discovering stuff by putting all the little pieces together that I find most gratifying.
For sure. And that gets to the point of context, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But first of all, before we get to that, I'd like to hear about what got you into archaeology in the first place and what has kept you in this field for so long.
Well, probably I had, due to my mom, I had an interest in history and took some anthropology classes in undergraduate and decided I really liked that area. And I was told I should do a field school. So my field school was at a place, this is the University of Arkansas, and it was Arkansas Post, which was the first major European settlement in the state. So this was also the first historical archaeology field school the university had ever conducted. And I was captivated by the idea of the physical remains, but also you had some documents to go to it. And so in the spring of 72, I saw an ad on a bulletin board for excavators needed at a place called St. Mary's City. I thought that was cool. Got hired. And that really, as you say in fishing, it set the hook in me because I just love the idea of having documents in the archaeology and you weave it all together with the cultural insights to come up and explore the past. And I was close going into prehistoric at that time, but those two experiences really made me go in this direction. So I've been in it ever since and haven't regretted it.
True that, I think some people have the misperception that if you're at a historic site with a lot of documentation, that you know everything. What else can archaeology teach you? But there's so much to be learned.
Absolutely the case. And there's always things that nobody writes down. I always like to think, how many times in the last 6 months has our viewers written what they had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? People don't talk about their food very often there. But also there's so much that so many people who couldn't even read and write in the 17th century. And so we are really, there's a paucity of information from the 1600s. It's a little better in the 1800s. For example, we don't have a single diary. We have only a handful of letters. Most of the documents, except for some legal records, have been destroyed. So the only way to really learn about their experiences and recreate what they were going through is archaeology.
Well, to that point, let's start talking about context and about the topic of your Maryland Archaeology Month essay. When it comes to context at St. Mary's City, there are so many different components. So knowing where all the artifacts came from is really vital.
Absolutely. It is very critical. And the object I used was a small medallion with the image of the King Gustavus Adolphus the Great, the Swedish king. He was a very important figure in the 30 Years' War that was raging between Catholic and Protestant. He was a leader of the Lutheran cause, a brilliant military commander. who was killed in battle actually in 1632. But the medal apparently was a commemorative item, according to Swedish experts, made after his death, and was worn by somebody who had a gift of remembrance, if you will, for this individual. But why we found it at St. Mary's City was a real mystery, and so knowing where it was found, the site, we were able to piece together the likely explanation for this rare object. It's the oldest, and I think thus far one of the only Gustavus Adolphus medals found in North America. So it's not a really common artifact. And the reason, I think, is that site was used as a records and office place in the early colony. And we know that Swedish immigrants came to that building to not only file land claims, but to file requests to become citizens. So this is like the very beginnings of naturalization of immigrants in what is now the United States. Maryland started that in the early 1660s. So it ties right into that loss of a personal item there, because I can't think of any other reason the Swede would be at this site except to do this type of business. So knowing where it was found really allows us to unravel the story of this unusual artifact and tie it to an ongoing process of immigration and naturalization that's still occurring and we're dealing with today.
I think that's a great example, because it sounds like an artifact like that on the surface by itself is cool, for sure. And if you just picked it up, on in a field or whatever, you would, maybe you do some research and get to understand it a little bit. But finding that story behind it just makes it all the more meaningful.
Absolutely. And that's why context in archaeology, we always talk about how important it is, because if you don't know where it is, you've lost half the information. You know what it is and maybe when, but the where is so critical. And that's true for all of our work there. I mean, when we found the lead coffins, knowing they were buried inside the Catholic Church was a rather important clue to know context in that case too, and helped us finally identify them. So, and I think the challenge of that is that when we do have a lot of use of metal detecting, some that helps archaeologists, but other times it can be very destructive, and its focus is on the object, not everything with it. And sometimes a datable object may be key to all the other artifacts that you see there. And if it's plucked out, you're losing a big chunk of that story. So it really is critical to know where things were found, to record it, to make sure that information is not lost in the glee over finding an object.
No, very well said. Well, why do you think that this is an important topic to talk about this year, right now?
Well, I think because the destruction of sites that we see is ongoing and in some respects perhaps accelerating. It's a hobby for a lot of people to go in and find stuff with their metal detectors. And I can understand the excitement of that. But at the same time, you're destroying part of our shared history when you do that. And we need to make people aware that knowing where it is something you ought to be just as concerned about as what the thing is in its own right. And I mean, whether it's on battlefields, where we now know that by plotting where things are, we even have the ability to recreate battles and to correct historical flaws that got into the record there. So, or the same as on a domestic site, where something is found, where it was lost, where it was used. All of that helps us be better interpreters of our shared past.
Well, very well said, Henry. And thank you so much for your time today and for all of your service to Maryland archaeology.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Pleasure to be here. And hello, everybody. Happy to be with you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.